I'm Master Saturn. Thank you for joining me for another BDSM United podcast. Shame, it's powerful, and the world is often ugly towards anyone it perceives as different. That's why people with kinks often look for a place of acceptance. When we go seeking out community around kink, we usually hope for what is really the impossible. We generally are looking for a judgment free and unbiased space, which doesn't exist anywhere because we're rational people who all have ideas and preferences. While our kink utopia is a fairy tale, we can do these two things within our community to lessen stigma and to ease shame. First, we can watch what we say and how we say it. The old adage, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, comes to mind. To someone carrying the baggage of shame, something as simple as not my kink can be perceived and interpreted as another person who does not welcome my kink, when that's not what you're intending to communicate or say. We often want to go the extra mile to talk about kink in positive instead of negative ways. Instead of talking about the ways that you're not into a kink, instead talk about the ways you see others enjoy that kink. Another thing to watch for is what I call assumed limits, which are those things that get discussed as limits, but are things that we really haven't even tried, or we have had a bad experience with due to a lack of skill, or we have limited knowledge about, or we have misinformation concerning it. They are kinks that we put on our limits list without looking at them objectively, without looking at them properly, without educating ourselves about them. To someone dealing with stigma surrounding their kink, seeing it on or hearing about it being a hard limit, or a more importantly, like a universal hard limit, can be perceived and interpreted as there is something wrong about me for liking this kink. We want to be sure that we can clearly communicate why something is on our limit list, and also personalize for ourselves why it's there. We also want to go the extra mile that we don't put extra emphasis on the word hard when discussing our limits in the broader community. It's good enough just to say, well, that's one of my limits. You don't have to always put that's a hard limit. Do you understand what I'm saying? Watching what we say and how we say it boils down to avoiding lazy statements. Communication is really heralded in our community, and rightly so. It's really important, and it's something that we all hold in high regard. So take the time to give a little more than not my kink or hard limit when communicating boundaries, when communicating limits, when communicating things that you do or don't enjoy. Secondly, we can lessen stigma and ease the shame associated with kink by affirming it. Let me repeat that. We can lessen stigma and ease the shame associated with kink by affirming it. Kink can be such an exciting and enlivening experience. It can foster new connections, help us explore parts of ourselves that we didn't know existed, and it can be downright sexy. It often takes years to come to a place of acceptance with our own kinky selves. This, in large part, because for a long time, there isn't anyone around to affirm for us that it's okay to be kinky in the first place. No matter what your kink might be, however embarrassing or far out that you might think it is. Even if you have ever wanted to fuck an alien or role play as a horse, wear a diaper, worship feet, and all the other fun stuff that may make some people squirm. Here are 6 kink affirmations from author Noah Red to push back against the stigma. One affirmation at a time. 1, there's nothing wrong with you. Or phrased it another way, it's not you, it's society. When something's a taboo, that doesn't make it inherently wrong or bad on its own. That's society's baggage, not yours. There's so many myths about kink that they're centered on the false idea that kinky people are broken or deviant, which simply isn't true. We get a lot of that from psychology, and psychology of the past of trying to put paraphilias together for people who are into taboo or kinky things, calling them deviant or psychologically broken. Really, are you being safe? Are you getting affirmative consent? Are you making sure not to harm anyone as far as injuring them permanently or scarring them permanently? Are you communicating openly with your partner or partners? These are the questions that should matter, and the fact that our culture seems more concerned with what people are doing rather than how safely or responsibly people are doing it points to a larger issue with how we view and educate people within our society. 2, you aren't the only one. It's really comforting to know that kinky folks are real and that they aren't just magical unicorns that only exist in imagination or pornography. It can take some time to find a community, whether it's online or in real life, but I can promise you that you're not alone. Number 3, it doesn't matter how weird it is. When we began to explore our desires around kink, some of us get worried about how weird it was. And this can be one of our biggest hangups. We hear this a lot from people who are struggling with accepting their kink because there's so much stigma around any kind of play that isn't vanilla, that isn't the norm within their society. It's easy to feel like what you're into is too peculiar or strange. What really puts it into perspective is who the hell cares? It's about whether or not it makes you happy. Number 4, it's okay to ask for what you want. It's one thing to know in theory that there's nothing wrong with you, that you aren't alone, and that it's okay to be weird, so to speak. But it's a whole different thing to work up the courage to share your desires with another person and to ask for what you want. Don't worry that opening up about kink is going to scare off a potential partner or that you'll be judged by them. Just communicate it, and communicate it as clearly as you can. As long as it's an invitation and not an expectation, there's nothing wrong with talking about what you're into. If someone reacts negatively or in a less than ideal way, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you or your kink. It just means that this particular person may not enjoy the same stuff that you enjoy. Number 5, you don't have to be out. There's a little bit of expectation that every kinky person will be loud and proud about everything that they like. They'll be at every play party, on every message board, plugged into every community. But the reality is a little more complicated. For some people, this isn't possible, or it just isn't what they want. Sometimes kink can look a little different. It's often a solitary activity for when nobody else is home, or it's someplace that you lurk every now and then, web pages that you visit, or forums. Or the fantasies that are just for you and your partner. And guess what? There's nothing wrong with that. You aren't any less kinky because you choose to go about it in a less visible way. You get to decide what kink looks like for you. And if you can't or don't want to be out, That's not a problem, and no one should be telling you otherwise. Just try to be ethical with it. Don't be going behind a partner's back that expresses that they feel like it's cheating or anything of that nature to, to quench these desires. Just make sure you go about it ethically, that you're not putting anyone in a position where they feel like they're being cheated on. You deserve acceptance and respect. No matter what you're into, no one should make you feel like less of a person because of it, unless that's your kink. But safe, consensual, openly negotiated, clearly communicated, that's the stuff that matters. Because as long as everyone's on board with defined boundaries and safe play, that's far and away what matters, not how taboo or unusual it seems. Too often jokes are made about kink at the expense of real people, people who may be struggling to accept themselves, who may feel ashamed or embarrassed because of a society that stigmatizes a totally healthy part of the human experience. It's alarming, to say the least, that we have to be told that kink doesn't make us bad, doesn't make us broken, or less deserving of dignity and respect. This is the society, though, that we live in, and the stigma that the kink community has been up against for a long time. But we still believe that we can rebuild the narratives around kink to be ones that are positive and affirming. Just to note, as we wrap up this episode, that there are some kinks that are always not a part of BDSM, and not and shouldn't be ones that you are looking into or trying to practice or do. And those are the ones where you are trying to do things with people who cannot give consent. Minors, doing things with minors, they cannot give consent. Doing things with animals, they cannot consent. Doing things with dead people, they cannot consent. And so those things are not a part, they never will be a part of general kink communities or BDSM communities, and they never should be. If you are interested or have fantasies or are practicing kink with minors and you're an adult, or kink with kink in ways that are rape, or kink with animals, or kink with dead things or dead people, corpses, you should definitely try to find a kink aware therapist and talk through those things. Talk about the fantasies that you're having and cease those kinds of activities, because those things are not part of our communities and they're damaging to these positive and affirming narratives that we're trying to build. So kink, the type of kink that we're talking about, is consensual between consenting adults, even if it has fantasies of non-consent, that it is consensual non-consent, and that everyone involved is able to give consent, because it matters. I'm Master Saturn. Thank you for joining me for this BDSM United podcast. You can find our naughty, not safe for work, non-censored or uncensored BDSM page at mastersaturn.com. You can also find our BDSM resources and educational pages and groups and things at bdsmunited.com. It was a joy bringing this topic to you today, a very important one, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.